Sometimes the people who promise to love you forever are the first to let go, and sometimes the person who stays is the one who never had to. The automatic doors of St. Matthew's Rehabilitation Hospital slid open with a quiet hiss as the late afternoon sun stretched long golden reflections across the polished floor. Evelyn Brooks sat motionless in her wheelchair, a thin gray blanket folded neatly over her knees despite the warm September air. At 67, she looked smaller than she had only 3 weeks earlier, as though the stroke had quietly taken more than strength from her body. Her left hand rested lifeless against the armrest while her right hand clung to the discharge folder lying in her lap. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the entrance, searching each passing vehicle with hopeful eyes that refused to surrender. The nurse beside her checked her watch, then looked back toward the nearly empty parking lot. "Mrs. Brooks," she said gently, "are you sure someone is coming?" Evelyn answered with a slow smile that barely reached her eyes. Speaking still required effort. "They said traffic." The words arrived softly, unevenly, but filled with the same faith she had carried through an entire lifetime. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Families embraced loved ones leaving the hospital. Children laughed as they climbed into SUVs. A man in work boots carefully helped his wife into a pickup truck before kissing her forehead. One by one, the parking spaces emptied until only silence remained. The nurse quietly dialed another number from Evelyn's emergency contact list. No answer. She tried the second daughter. Straight to voicemail. The third answered briefly before apologizing that she was in the middle of an important client meeting and promising someone would call back. No one did. The nurse lowered the phone and forced a smile that could not hide the sadness in her eyes. "Would you like me to arrange transportation to a care facility?" Evelyn stared across the street instead of answering. The rehabilitation exercises had taught her how to stand for nearly 30 seconds and take 4 careful steps with a walker, but they had never taught her what to do when the people she had spent 40 years loving no longer had room for her. A cool breeze drifted through the hospital entrance, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and distant barbecue from a neighborhood several blocks away. Autumn leaves rolled gently across the sidewalk, collecting near the curb before dancing into the street again. Then came the quiet squeak of bicycle tires. A boy no older than 13 slowed to a stop across the street, balancing one sneaker against the pavement. He had noticed the elderly woman sitting alone every afternoon during his ride home from middle school, but today something felt different. There was no family beside her, no car waiting, only a hospital wheelchair facing an empty parking lot. Noah Carter adjusted the backpack hanging from one shoulder and watched for another moment. He could have kept riding. Most people probably would have. Instead, he turned the handlebars toward the crosswalk. As the traffic light changed, he pedaled slowly across the street, parked his bike beside the hospital entrance, and walked up with the awkward uncertainty only a kind-hearted kid could have. He looked at Evelyn, then at the discharge papers in her lap, then back toward the empty road where no one seemed to be coming. Finally, in a voice so quiet it almost disappeared into the evening breeze, he asked, "Ma'am, are you waiting for somebody, or are they waiting too long?" Evelyn looked at the boy for several long seconds before a faint smile softened the tired lines around her face. Her words came slowly, each one carefully finding its way through the lingering effects of the stroke. "I thought they would come." Noah nodded without interrupting. He had learned after losing his own mother years earlier that silence sometimes carried more kindness than answers ever could. He glanced toward the empty street one last time before asking the nurse, "Does she have somewhere to go?" The nurse sighed quietly. "She does. She lives alone. We were hoping one of her daughters would help her settle in." Noah looked back at Evelyn, surprised. "You have 3 daughters?" Evelyn gave a tiny nod. Her eyes drifted toward the parking lot again, although the hope inside them had grown noticeably smaller. "They are busy." She said it as though she were protecting them instead of herself. The nurse helped adjust the blanket across Evelyn's knees before gently placing a small paper bag into her lap. Inside was a bottle of medication, a few printed instructions, and a peanut butter sandwich prepared by the hospital cafeteria because someone had realized she had not eaten since breakfast. Noah noticed the untouched sandwich. "Are you hungry?" Evelyn hesitated before admitting with an embarrassed smile, "A little." Noah reached into his backpack and pulled out the apple he had packed for school that morning but never eaten. It was slightly bruised from bouncing around beside his math book all day. He carefully polished it against his sweatshirt and placed it beside the sandwich. "You can have mine too." Evelyn looked at the apple as though it were something priceless. Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked away the tears before they could fall. Kindness had become unfamiliar enough that even the smallest gesture felt overwhelming. Nearly 40 years earlier, Evelyn Brooks had walked these same hospital halls wearing navy blue scrubs instead of a patient bracelet. She had spent thousands of overnight shifts comforting frightened families, holding newborn babies, encouraging cancer patients through impossible mornings, and sitting beside elderly strangers who simply did not want to be alone. Her coworkers often joked that she remembered every patient by name, even years later. She never corrected them because it was true. She believed people deserved to be remembered. Long after her 12-hour shifts ended, she hurried home to raise 3 daughters by herself after losing her husband to a heart attack when the youngest was only 6. She skipped vacations, postponed replacing her aging sedan, worked holiday weekends, and accepted every extra shift the hospital offered so Angela could attend law school, Denise could finish medical school, and Monica could earn her business degree. Every diploma hanging in their homes carried invisible pieces of her sacrifice. She had never once complained, because she believed love was measured by what a parent quietly gave away. Now, sitting beneath the fading September sunlight with weakened muscles and uncertain speech, she found herself unable to understand how a lifetime filled with giving had somehow ended in an empty parking lot. Noah could not possibly know any of that history. He only saw an elderly woman sitting alone, while everyone else seemed to have someone waiting. To him, that was reason enough. He picked up the handles of her wheelchair with quiet determination and smiled. "My house is right across the street. My dad is still at work, but I think we can get you home first." For the first time since leaving her hospital room that afternoon, Evelyn felt something stronger than disappointment. She felt that perhaps the longest walk back into life would begin with the smallest act of kindness from someone who had no reason to stop, yet chose to anyway. The trip home took less than 10 minutes, yet it felt much longer to Evelyn. Noah carefully pushed the wheelchair along the familiar sidewalks of Maple Street, slowing whenever the pavement became uneven. The neighborhood was quiet in the gentle glow of early evening. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically across freshly cut lawns. Wind chimes swayed beneath shaded porches, and the smell of homemade chili drifted through an open kitchen window somewhere down the block. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved from a distance, but rarely crossed the street anymore. When they reached Evelyn's small white house, the flower beds beside the front porch had become overgrown during her weeks in rehabilitation. Brown leaves covered the walkway, and unopened mail filled the black mailbox near the curb. Noah stopped for a moment, noticing everything without saying a word. He simply reached into Evelyn's purse after she quietly pointed toward the house key. The lock clicked open, and the front door slowly swung inward. The living room greeted them with stillness. Family photographs lined the mantel above the fireplace. 3 graduation portraits stood proudly beside framed nursing awards that had collected a thin layer of dust. Angela smiled in her law school robe. Denise wore her white medical coat. Monica stood in front of a downtown office building holding an award for young entrepreneurs. Every picture told the story of success. None of them explained why the house had become so quiet. Noah wheeled Evelyn inside and helped place the small hospital bag on the coffee table. The silence felt heavy until he finally asked, "Would you like me to make sure everything works before I go home?" Evelyn nodded gratefully. While she rested, Noah walked through the little house checking lights, turning on the kitchen faucet, and making certain the refrigerator still hummed. It was mostly empty except for a carton of milk that had expired weeks earlier, a jar of mustard, and half a loaf of bread wrapped carefully inside a plastic bag. He frowned but said nothing. Returning to the living room, he noticed a folded calendar lying beside Evelyn's favorite reading chair. Nearly every date before her stroke had been filled with careful handwriting. Monday, volunteer at the church pantry. Wednesday, bake cookies for neighborhood fundraiser. Friday, dinner with Denise. Sunday, family lunch. The calendar stopped completely after the ambulance had taken her away. Noah gently closed it. "My dad says a house feels lonely when nobody laughs inside it," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Your father is wise." Noah shrugged with a shy grin. "He works nights driving city buses, so it is mostly just the two of us." We kind of take care of each other." Before Evelyn could answer, a pickup truck pulled into the driveway across the street. Noah glanced through the window. "That is my dad." He hurried outside and waved as Marcus Carter climbed out wearing his transit uniform, looking exhausted after a long shift. Noah quickly explained everything that had happened at the hospital. Marcus listened without interrupting, then looked toward Evelyn sitting alone inside the softly lit living room. He removed his cap, walked across the street, and knocked gently before stepping inside. "Mrs. Brooks," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I am Marcus Carter. Looks like my son found himself another person to worry about." Evelyn laughed for the first time in weeks. It was quiet and uneven, but real. Marcus noticed the unopened discharge papers, the empty refrigerator, and the medication sitting untouched on the table. He did not ask uncomfortable questions. Instead, he smiled the same way Noah had smiled outside the hospital. "Well," he said, rolling up his sleeves, "first things first. Nobody starts a new chapter on an empty stomach." The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight that filtered gently through the lace curtains of Evelyn's living room, painting soft patterns across the hardwood floor. She woke to the familiar ache in her shoulder and the stiffness that always greeted her before the rest of her body remembered how to move. Recovery was never dramatic. It lived inside tiny victories that most people would never notice. A finger that bent a little farther than yesterday. A step that felt slightly steadier. A sentence that came together without so many pauses. Before she could reach for the walker beside her chair, the quiet sound of a lawn mower drifted through the open window. Curious, she slowly turned her head. Noah was outside pushing an old mower across her front yard, stopping every few feet to empty the bag of freshly cut grass. Marcus was trimming the hedges along the walkway while humming softly to himself. Neither of them seemed to think they were doing anything extraordinary. They simply worked as though caring for Evelyn's little house had always been part of their routine. By the time Noah knocked on the front door, the porch had been swept clean, the mailbox emptied, and the flower beds looked alive again beneath the cool October sky. He stepped inside carrying 2 grocery bags balanced carefully in his arms. Fresh fruit, soup, oatmeal, vegetables, milk, whole grain bread, and a bouquet of bright yellow sunflowers peeked out from the top. "Dad said flowers make people heal faster," Noah said with an embarrassed grin. Marcus laughed from behind him. "I actually said they make a house smile again." Evelyn looked from the flowers to the father and son standing in her doorway, and something inside her chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. Days quietly settled into a gentle rhythm. Every afternoon after school, Noah crossed the street before he even changed out of his backpack. He checked Evelyn's medications against the printed schedule taped neatly beside the refrigerator. He filled her water bottle, helped organize the mail, and patiently counted each slow step during her physical therapy exercises across the hallway. "One more," he always encouraged whenever she wanted to stop. "You did 6 yesterday. Today you can do 7. Some afternoons, she managed only 5. Noah celebrated them anyway. In return, Evelyn discovered she still had something precious to give. She noticed Noah struggling with algebra homework spread across the dining room table one rainy evening. Smiling, she reached for a pencil with her stronger hand. "Numbers are like patience," she explained slowly. "Listen before you fix." Noah blinked in confusion at first, then laughed as she patiently showed him a simpler way to solve the problem. The answer appeared almost immediately. "You were a really good nurse, were not you?" he asked. Evelyn smiled warmly. "I loved people." From that day forward, homework became part of their afternoons together. She helped him prepare for science quizzes, listened as he practiced history presentations, and gently corrected his grammar whenever he read aloud from classic American novels. Noah began lingering longer after every lesson, not because he had to, but because the quiet little house no longer felt lonely. It felt like home. Across the street, neighbors slowly noticed the unusual friendship growing between the retired nurse and the middle school boy. Some smiled as they passed by. Others waved from their driveways. Few realized that while Noah believed he was helping Evelyn learn to walk again, Evelyn was quietly teaching him something far greater. Every shared meal, every solved homework problem, every careful step across the living room was building a bond neither of them had expected, one that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with choosing to show up, day after day, simply because someone mattered. 3 weeks slipped by with the quiet rhythm of ordinary kindness. The maple trees along the street had turned brilliant shades of amber and crimson, and every afternoon Noah crossed the road with the same familiar smile, never checking the time, never acting as though helping Evelyn was a chore. Little by little, her strength returned. She could now stand long enough to water the flower pots on her porch, and with her walker, she could make it all the way from the living room to the kitchen without stopping. Every new step felt like reclaiming a tiny piece of the life she thought she had lost. Then, on a cool Friday afternoon, the peaceful routine was interrupted by the sound of 3 expensive vehicles pulling into the driveway almost one after another. Noah looked through the front window as 3 sharply dressed women stepped out carrying designer handbags and talking quickly into their phones before ending their calls. Angela reached the porch first, followed by Denise and Monica. They had not visited once since Evelyn returned home, yet now they stood outside together as though nothing had happened. Evelyn's smile appeared almost instantly. Hope had always been quicker than memory. She slowly made her way toward the front door with her walker, her breathing steady but excited. "Girls," she whispered as Noah opened the door. For a brief moment the sisters hugged their mother politely, careful not to wrinkle their tailored jackets. Their smiles were warm enough for photographs, but disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. Angela glanced around the modest living room. Denise noticed the repaired flower beds outside the window. Monica picked up a stack of unpaid utility bills from the coffee table before setting them back down. Finally, Angela cleared her throat. "Mom, we heard from one of the neighbors that the property values on this street have gone up almost 40% this year." Evelyn blinked, unsure why that mattered. Monica smiled as she unfolded several printed papers from her purse. "A developer has been buying houses around here. They are offering excellent prices. We thought maybe it is finally time to sell this place and move you somewhere more practical." Denise nodded. "An assisted living community would be much easier for you. You would have nurses available every day." Noah quietly stood near the kitchen doorway, saying nothing. Evelyn looked from one daughter to another before softly asking, "You came for the house?" The room grew still. None of them answered immediately. Angela finally spoke in the calm voice she often used in courtrooms. "We are just trying to think ahead, Mom. It makes financial sense." Before Evelyn could respond, Noah gently picked up her sweater from the back of the chair. "Miss Evelyn," he said softly, "the roses in the backyard are blooming again. Do you want to see them before the sun goes down?" Evelyn looked into the boy's eyes and understood exactly what he was doing. He was giving her a way to breathe. She nodded gratefully. Noah carefully helped her onto the back patio while Marcus, who had just returned from work, greeted the 3 sisters with quiet courtesy before following them outside a few minutes later. The autumn air felt crisp and clean. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth across the yard. Noah slowly walked beside Evelyn as she admired the bright red roses she had planted with her late husband decades earlier. "They survived," she whispered. Noah smiled. Maybe because somebody kept believing they would. Inside the house, raised voices drifted faintly through the open screen door as the sisters debated square footage, market prices, and paperwork. Outside, surrounded by roses glowing beneath the golden evening light, Evelyn rested one trembling hand on Noah's shoulder. In that quiet moment, she realized something that hurt far more than the stroke ever had. The people discussing her future had stopped seeing her as a mother. The boy standing beside her still saw a person. The conversation inside the house faded into the background as the evening settled gently over the backyard. The last rays of sunlight slipped through the branches of the old maple tree, casting long golden shadows across the garden that Evelyn and her late husband had planted more than 30 years before. The roses swayed quietly in the cool breeze, their petals glowing like tiny lanterns against the deepening autumn sky. Noah stood patiently beside Evelyn without saying much. He had learned that healing did not always need conversation. Sometimes it only needed someone willing to remain close. Evelyn rested both hands on the handle of her walker and stared at the narrow stone path winding through the flower beds. Just a month earlier, she could barely stand without assistance. Now she took one careful step, paused, steadied her breathing, and then took another. The movement was slow enough that most people would never call it progress. Noah did. "That was farther than yesterday," he said with a proud smile. Evelyn looked at the ground and softly laughed. "Only 2 more steps. Noah shook his head. No. For more? I counted. She looked at him with playful disbelief. 4. He nodded confidently. I always count the ones you forget. A gentle silence settled between them again. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked once before everything became still. Wind rustled through the drying leaves, and a flock of birds crossed the orange sky in perfect formation as though even they understood it was time to return home. Evelyn slowly reached the wooden bench near the garden and lowered herself onto it with great care. Noah sat beside her, setting his backpack at his feet. For several moments neither of them spoke. The world seemed content to breathe around them. Finally Evelyn turned toward the boy. Speaking had become easier over the past few weeks, but certain words still required courage rather than strength. Noah. He looked up immediately. Yes, Miss Evelyn. She studied his face, noticing the same quiet kindness she had seen on the day they first met outside the hospital. There was no expectation in his eyes, no desire for recognition, only genuine concern for another person. She realized that kindness like his could not be taught in a single lesson. It was practiced one ordinary day at a time. Her voice trembled slightly as she placed her stronger hand over his. I am proud of you. Noah blinked. He smiled politely at first, but the words settled somewhere much deeper than either of them expected. He looked away toward the roses, swallowing hard. Nobody has ever really said that to me before, he admitted quietly. Dad tells me he loves me every day, but proud, that sounds different. Evelyn squeezed his hand gently. Because you earn every day. Noah lowered his head, suddenly unable to find the right words. The evening breeze brushed softly across the garden, carrying the scent of roses and fresh earth between them. Neither noticed Marcus standing quietly near the back porch after returning from checking the mailbox. He had heard every word. His eyes lingered on his son before turning toward Evelyn with silent gratitude. In that peaceful backyard, surrounded by fading sunlight and blooming flowers, 3 lonely hearts discovered something many people spend a lifetime searching for. Family was not always the people who shared your last name. Sometimes it was simply the people who chose to stay long after everyone else had found a reason to leave. Winter arrived quietly, covering Maple Street with a thin blanket of frost that sparkled beneath the morning sun. The roses had fallen asleep beneath the cold, but inside Evelyn's little house life had begun to bloom again. She no longer needed the wheelchair except for longer trips. Her walker stood folded neatly beside the front door more often than it was being used, and every week her speech grew stronger, smoother, more confident. On the first Monday of December, she surprised Noah by answering the door without any assistance. It took longer than it once had, but she reached the porch on her own. Noah's face lit up the moment he saw her standing there. You did it, he exclaimed. Evelyn laughed, the sound fuller now than it had been in months. We did it. Noah smiled, but before he could answer, a black sedan slowly pulled into the driveway. A man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. His silver hair and calm expression gave him the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to delivering important news. He introduced himself as Harold Bennett, Evelyn's longtime attorney. She welcomed him inside while Noah prepared hot chocolate in the kitchen, assuming it was simply another meeting about paperwork or insurance. Harold carefully removed a thick folder from his briefcase and placed it on the dining room table beside several sealed envelopes. Evelyn, he said gently, after your hospitalization, you asked me to prepare something in case your health ever changed unexpectedly. I finished everything last week, but I thought you should review it before it is officially filed. Evelyn nodded. She slowly opened the folder while Noah quietly remained in the kitchen, trying not to listen. Harold continued speaking in his calm, measured voice. Your daughters will each receive the family photographs, personal keepsakes, and several items you specifically listed. Your home, if you choose to keep this version, will eventually be sold according to your instructions. Evelyn listened carefully before asking the question that mattered most. The scholarship? Harold smiled. Everything is ready. He turned several pages until he reached the final section. The Evelyn and Charles Brooks Future Care Scholarship. It will provide full tuition assistance every year for students pursuing nursing, physical therapy, or rehabilitation medicine. It will be funded through the sale of your property and your retirement savings exactly as you requested. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment. remembering the thousands of patients she had cared for during 4 decades at the hospital. Even after she was gone, she wanted healing to continue. Harold then slid one final envelope across the table. It was noticeably thicker than the others. "And this," he said softly, "is separate from the scholarship." Evelyn rested her hand on the envelope before looking toward the kitchen, where Noah was carefully stirring marshmallows into 3 steaming mugs without realizing the conversation had shifted toward him. "He must never feel alone," she whispered. Harold nodded. "Inside are letters of recommendation from physicians, former patients, hospital administrators, and community leaders whose lives you touched over the years. There are 43 letters in total. I contacted every person you asked me to contact. Every single one agreed. When Noah graduates from high school, these letters will accompany a fully funded educational trust created in his name. The money is important, but these recommendations may open even more doors than the scholarship itself." Evelyn smiled through glistening eyes. "He dreams bigger than he knows." At that moment, Noah walked into the dining room, carrying the mugs on a tray. He noticed the open folder, but politely looked away. Harold accepted the cup with a grateful smile, while Evelyn watched the young boy laugh about burning one batch of marshmallows because he had become distracted feeding birds outside the kitchen window. She said nothing about the documents resting only a few feet away. Some gifts, she believed, became even more meaningful when they arrived as complete surprises. Looking at Noah's cheerful face, she quietly realized that the greatest investment she had ever made was not written inside any legal document. It had begun on the afternoon one lonely boy chose to cross a street instead of riding past. Spring arrived with gentle rain and bright green leaves that slowly replaced the bare branches outside Evelyn's front window. The neighborhood seemed to breathe differently now. Children rode bicycles later into the evening. Birds returned to the maple trees, and the little garden behind Evelyn's house exploded with fresh color once again. The roses she had feared were gone forever pushed through the soil with quiet determination, reminding her that some beautiful things only needed time and patient care. Nearly 7 months had passed since the afternoon Noah first crossed the street. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Every Saturday morning Marcus grilled pancakes while Noah insisted on making scrambled eggs, even though they were never shaped the same way twice. Evelyn laughed every single time. Her laughter had become stronger than anyone expected. Her speech flowed almost normally now, interrupted only by the occasional pause when she grew tired. She no longer counted every careful step because walking had slowly become part of living again instead of something she had to conquer. One sunny afternoon, Harold Bennett returned carrying another folder, though much thinner than before. This time he was not there to discuss legal documents. Everything had already been finalized exactly as Evelyn requested. Instead, he sat with her on the back porch overlooking the blooming roses while Noah and Marcus replaced loose boards on the backyard fence. Their cheerful conversation drifted across the yard with the sound of hammers tapping gently against fresh wood. Harold smiled as he watched them work together. "You made the right decision," he said quietly. Evelyn followed his gaze toward Noah. The boy was laughing after accidentally dropping a handful of nails into the grass, and Marcus was pretending it was the most serious construction disaster in American history. "The papers are finished," Harold continued, "but I have practiced law for more than 40 years. I have learned that legal documents can transfer property. They cannot transfer love." Evelyn nodded slowly. Love already found him. Harold closed the folder and rested it on the bench beside him. "Your daughters called my office again last week. They wanted to schedule another meeting." Evelyn remained silent for a moment. There was no anger in her expression, only a quiet sadness softened by acceptance. "Did they ask about me?" Harold hesitated before answering honestly. "Mostly about the estate." Evelyn looked back toward the garden where Noah had stopped working after noticing a small robin building a nest beneath the porch roof. Rather than disturbing it, he quietly moved the ladder several feet away and suggested they finish the fence from the opposite side. Such a small decision revealed the same gentle heart she had come to know so well. "No," Evelyn whispered with a peaceful smile. "They are not bad people. They just forgot what matters." Several days later, the 3 sisters arrived together once again. This visit felt different. There were no folders, no market reports, and no conversations about real estate. They found Evelyn sitting on the front porch beside Noah, who was reading aloud from a novel for his English class, while she corrected his pronunciation every now and then with the patient voice of a lifelong teacher. The sisters stood quietly at the bottom of the steps for several moments before Angela finally spoke. "Mom, we have been thinking." Evelyn looked up with calm eyes. Denise stepped forward first. "We spent so much time planning your future that we forgot to be part of your present." Monica's voice trembled. "We cannot change those months. We wish we could." The silence that followed was gentle rather than uncomfortable. Evelyn slowly reached for all three of their hands. "I forgave you long ago." Tears gathered in each daughter's eyes, not because they had lost something valuable, but because they suddenly understood what they had almost lost forever. Noah quietly stood to leave, believing the family deserved privacy, but Evelyn reached out and gently caught his sleeve before he could take a single step. "Stay," she said with quiet certainty. "Family stays." And for the first time since that lonely afternoon outside the hospital, everyone remained exactly where they belonged. 5 years passed more quickly than anyone expected. The little white house remained exactly where it had always stood, but the life inside it had changed in quiet, beautiful ways. Evelyn still tended the roses every spring, although Noah often insisted on carrying the watering can before she had the chance. Marcus continued driving his city bus, proudly collecting every report card, every certificate, and every letter Noah brought home from school. Angela, Denise, and Monica visited often now. They no longer arrived carrying property listings or financial plans. Instead, they brought homemade casseroles, family photo albums, and grandchildren who filled the once silent living room with laughter. The house that had nearly become a symbol of loneliness had become a place where people gathered simply because they wanted to be together. On a warm June morning, sunlight poured across the campus of the State University as rows of graduates waited in dark blue caps and gowns. Families filled the stadium, waving signs, wiping away tears, and searching eagerly for familiar faces. Noah Carter stood near the front of his graduating class with quiet confidence. The same gentle smile he had worn the afternoon he crossed the street years before. Around his neck rested several academic honor cords, and tucked safely inside his graduation folder was the acceptance letter that would soon begin the next chapter of his life at one of the country's leading medical schools. His dream had become clear long ago. He wanted to help people recover after strokes and life-changing illnesses, just as he had watched Evelyn fight her way back one determined step at a time. When the ceremony ended, students rushed toward their families. Cameras flashed beneath the bright summer sky while proud parents embraced sons and daughters who had reached an important milestone. Noah walked slowly across the lawn until he found the people who had shaped his journey. Marcus wrapped him in a long embrace, his eyes shining with pride. Angela, Denise, and Monica applauded as though celebrating one of their own children. Then Noah turned toward Evelyn. She stood waiting beneath the shade of an old oak tree wearing a pale blue dress and holding a single white rose from her garden. Her posture was steady now. The walker had disappeared years earlier. She opened her arms, and Noah hugged her gently, careful as always, although she laughed and reminded him she was stronger than he still believed. "You were right," he whispered. "I dreamed bigger than I knew." Evelyn smiled with quiet satisfaction. "No," she answered softly. "You simply became the man you were already choosing to become." Later that afternoon, after the celebration had ended and the campus had grown quiet again, Noah sat alone on a wooden bench overlooking a small pond. From the inside pocket of his suit jacket, he removed a carefully folded envelope that had become one of his greatest treasures. Inside were copies of the 43 letters Harold Bennett had given him after Evelyn surprised him with the educational trust several years earlier. Every letter spoke about compassion, service, patience, and dignity. None of them praised wealth or success. Every one described the simple decision to remain beside another human being when it mattered most. Noah gently folded the letters once more and looked across the calm water where sunlight shimmered like liquid gold. He finally understood that the greatest inheritance Evelyn had ever given him was never the scholarship or the trust she created. It was the example of a life spent choosing kindness even after disappointment, forgiveness even after heartbreak, and hope even after being left behind. As the evening breeze stirred the trees overhead, Noah quietly stood and began walking toward the future, carrying with him everything that truly mattered. Behind him, the white rose rested on the empty bench, glowing softly in the last light of day, while somewhere far away, a garden on Maple Street continued to bloom because one small act of kindness had once crossed a road and changed every life it touched.